Welcome to the Reformed Devils. I'm Dr. Owen Anderson, and I'm joined by my friend, Dr. John Barth, and we're professors at Arizona State University. I teach philosophy, and he teaches history, and we've named ourselves the Reformed Devils. And I want to comment on that for a minute because we're not saying that we're with the devil or we like the devil, but the name has two meanings. ASU's mascot is the Sun Devil. So ASU students are sometimes called the Devils, and professors at ASU were the Devils. But we're Reformed Devils, second meaning that we affirm total depravity. We're born into this world needing regeneration. We need a new heart. And we affirm the doctrines of the Reformation, sometimes summarized just with the five solas, ending with the highest one, Sola Deo Gloria, which points us in all things to the glory of God. And then also the summary of soteriology from the Reformation in the Tulip, sometimes called the 5 points of Calvinism. But we're also confessionally reformed. So you can ask either one of us either about the Westminster Confession or London Baptist Confession. Yeah, and we're all good with that. So that's kind of what we're doing here. We're talking about what is it like to be reformed and yet be at the largest secular research university in the country. And today we want to talk about religious bias among professors. Have you ever experienced anything like that, John?
Oh yeah, of course. And to be fair, there are many professors when I was a student who didn't comment on the subject at all. Yeah. But ordinarily, when it was commented upon, the presumption was God doesn't exist, or we can't know God.
That's the key.
And that there is no such thing as an attainable truth that we can arrive upon about God.
Yeah, that's been my experience is the skepticism, especially. If a professor says there is no God and you raise a question like, well, how do you know that? They'll say, well, yeah, no one really knows. So they're not so much arguing for atheism, but they'll say, yeah, it's just, we don't know, and it's probably a fairy tale like all the other fairy tales. Usually it seems like that's what happens. Go ahead.
I've had a few flat out atheist professors, yeah. Don't get me wrong, but I've never had, and again, our majors were different. You know, I was in history, you're in philosophy, so the subject didn't come up as much, but when it did come up, there was the Christian perspective was never forwarded. It was always either agnostic or atheist.
Now, sometimes people think that's what you're supposed to do at the secular university. So they might think, that's what secular university is. What are you guys bringing this up for? I remember I had a student one semester, beginning of Philosophy 101, raise her hand. I called on the student, and he said, well, as a philosophy professor, you're obviously also an atheist. And then he went in, that was the preface to his question. And I just kind of chuckled to myself because the assumption is, if you're in philosophy, then of course you must be an atheist. But that's not what the secular university requires. A secular university with secular just means the study of this world, what we could call in theology general revelation. So it doesn't require you to be an atheist at all. You might study general revelation for the glory of God.
Right. That's right.
So, and also the other one I've heard is neutrality. Well, you got to be neutral. And there is something to that, just in the sense that, especially in our fields, I think we're both trained to represent the other position as best we can. Not do what they call a straw man, but give the best of all possible positions. But it doesn't follow from that we don't think there's a true answer.
Right. That's right. We can touch on this more in a bit, but there is this other, even and they're connected, but this greater presumption that truth doesn't exist, that objective truth that in essence does not truly exist, and that's part of the whole package.
That's right. So that's one of the religious or philosophical biases we want to talk about. What's called academic skepticism, and it's interesting to use that term because the academy it's talking about there is the old academy in Athens, which quickly became skeptical. Right. And so that's been kind of the position of intellectuals in the West is once you become an intellectual, you know so much that you know you don't know.
Right.
And so I think in world religions, which I study, and history, which you study, one of the things that the professor will say is, well, look, there's lots of religions. I mean, sure, you think Christianity is true, but that's what other people think of their religion. So we just don't really know.
Right. And, the Bible is very clear that obviously that completely contravenes the entire message of forwarded in scripture and in the gospel. It's interesting. There's a fascinating passage in the Gospel of John, chapter 18. You probably know the one I'm talking about, where Jesus is on trial and he has a conversation with Pilate. And he tells Pilate asks him, "Are you a king? Do you see yourself as a king?" And then Christ explains, "For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world to bear witness to" what? "To the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." And then Pilate responded with a question. He snickered a bit. He said, "What is truth?"
Yeah.
Pilate was the skeptic in that
academic
conversation.
skeptic.
Yeah.
He's probably he's seen it all.
Mm-hmm.
What's truth? I mean, the other peoples all think they have truth, and you think you have truth, right?
That's right. And so, it's this very dismissive attitude to anyone, and it's this view that if you make a truth claim, that somehow you are a simpleton. You're not as intellectually sophisticated as those who really know that the world is much too complex to boil down to axioms or to truth claims.
Yep, exactly. So before I get into some numbers, the two characters I encounter, we've talked about one of them, which is the skeptic, sneering. Yeah, what's truth? Yeah, once you become educated, you know more. But what they're responding to, I think, is another character called the Thefetist. And so the Thefetist just simply believes things. And there could be Christian Thefetists, but you could have a Thefetist, you could have a superstitious Thefetist who just believes wearing a certain necklace keeps away cancer or something, right? So Theism is obviously problematic. And I think part of what's justifying the skeptic is they're trying to help Theists become more thoughtful. And so I call this the move from being a pre-skeptic, you're a Theist, to being a skeptic. But that's the middle. You got stuck. You want to become a post-skeptic, which is when you know how to know things. So you have unthoughtful beliefs, you critically examine them and realize, I don't know, and then they get stuck there. Well, what I want to do, and I'm sure you do as well, is get to the next level and actually have knowledge. You're a rehabilitated skeptic. You're a reformed. You're a post-skeptic. So I think that's one of the ways I illustrate it, these two characters.
Before you go into these stats, there's a very famous book that was published in the late 1980s that you're very familiar with, by Alan Bloom. He was a philosopher at Cornell University, at University of Chicago, and it was called The Closing of the American Mind. And if you haven't read that book, you really got to read it. It's just packed full of just great commentary on the university in the 1980s that applies today. But he made the point, he was describing how moral relativism has taken over the university, especially the humanities. And his point, bring it back to what you're talking about with skepticism, he argued that open-mindedness used to be seen as a means to an end.
Right.
And what was the what was the end? The end was truth.
Right. Yep.
But now open-mindedness has become the end itself.
Yeah, you just stay there.
And the humanists, the philosophers, the historians have surrendered any hope of ever arriving at that truth.
Yep.
And so we're stuck. It's essentially, I can't remember who said this. Somebody else made this comment. Essentially, the universities, Western universities, have arrived at a dead end.
Yep.
And there's nowhere. Where do you go from here with existentialism, deconstruction, postmodernism, and all this relativism? You can't go anywhere from there.
Well, they're not getting knowledge. I mean, the purpose of the university is to knowledge. I think our university president has explicitly said we're in the knowledge production business. That's what we do. We produce knowledge. And so that would be true in the humanities. It's different for science, engineering, and humanities. They might do these differently, but we still want to know things.
Right.
And if you start on day one, you say, hey, we can't know anything. Well, what's the point then, right? What are we doing here?
Right.
Well, and I think the thing about the closing American mind is how it still applies, right? This was like 1987 or something, and what he's saying there, tracing an intellectual lineage really from Rousseau to Nietzsche to Foucault, and we still see Foucault as like him and his disciples as the major impact on the humanities today.
Yep, he's the godfather of a lot of this. Ironically, we're going too far astray, but ironically, actually, critical theory violates a lot of Foucauldian premises. But we can say that.
I think we should do a whole segment on this in the future.
I think so. So to the audience, we're going to address critical theory, and maybe the next podcast we'll see. But we're planning to do that. That's a whole different subject. But Owen, you said you had some statistics to spit out at us.
Yeah, so I'm looking up. I found this 10-year-old study, so 2010, so it's not that bad, but it was by scholars Gross and Simmons, and they were looking at belief in God distributed among the 20 largest disciplinary fields, and essentially what they found is that it's not, they were countering this claim. Once you become a professor, you're an atheist. So they said that's not what the numbers show. It's not just like every single professor is an atheist, but the numbers are all elevated differently than the population. So yes, there are more atheists who are professors than the population in the United States. It was let's see. Well, let me go about this. Sorry, I was looking at the statistics specifically in engineering and psychology. So 50% are either atheists or agnostics. And so that's 50, larger.
Wait. 50%.
Yeah. Woo. That's larger than the general population, which is like 8 or 9%.
And actually, and there was a survey that came out just recently about the general population, and belief in God among the general population is also going down. But even now, with the decreased numbers, it's still it's close to 80%, I believe, among the general population. 50%, wow.
And then they have broken down by discipline. So distributed among the largest disciplines. In terms of atheists, professors of psychology and mechanical engineering led the pack. And that was up there just a little bit above 50. And then biologists were next, and accounting professors next. But then you start to get into interesting numbers where again, we're looking at like 52%, 48%, but the 48% then is do believe in God. So you get almost half there still don't believe in God, or we don't know, or believe in God, or I think so, I just don't know. But for me as a religious studies scholar, that's not that interesting, because God is too empty of a term, right?
Yeah.
What does this mean? You believe in love, right? Just feelings in the universe, or you believe in Zeus, or what? So then it gets into specifics about religious belief, and that's when you see it's really low. It was like 5% of professors believe the Bible is the Word of God.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? I mean, the other 50, if there's 50% of people, professors who believe in God, 45% of them don't think the Bible is the Word of God. So it's some other sort of God.
Right.
So that's not particularly a good number for religious people who would say, yeah, we're doing really well. We've got a high percentage. Well, one, it's lower than the population. So it's leaning towards saying once you get into the academy, you're going to have your faith stripped. And then secondly, they're not believing in biblical Christianity.
No, they believe in, it's probably, I would venture, unless you have these numbers, it's probably sort of like a pantheism. God is, there's a vague force out there, or God's in everything.
The universe itself, something like that. So, I mean, even Carl Sagan would talk mystically about the universe in a way that's like God. So it's not very meaningful. But then the other one, that this wasn't part of that study, but another statistic that I read was that for those students coming into the university who do have belief in God, belief that the Bible is the word of God, 70% of those leave the university without faith.
That was me.
That's the, yeah. And I want you to tell us your story, but I want us to pause for a minute on that. Wait a minute. Why is that happening? That's the problem I wanted us to especially get to today. Is that because they're learning some brand new information that they didn't know before? Or is it because there's a religious bias against their biblical faith? And so there's, what are the options? I mean, so yeah, tell us about your experience. What happened?
I mean, I did not have, I had a couple, I went to Appalachian State University from undergraduate, grew up in
ASU.
the church. Yeah, another ASU. Grew up in the church, as a kid and into high school. It's a non-denominational Protestant church, good church, but I didn't have a strong intellectual understanding. I definitely knew nothing of apologetics or anything like that. Went into college, and I never had a professor who just like drilled into my head. Well, no, I had one. I had one, now that I'm starting to think about it. I had an English teacher, because I was hanging on to my faith. I'm getting too much into weeds here, but I was drawn to left-wing ideas.
Yeah.
It was during the Bush era. Bush was a garbage president, so I was like, I must be left-wing. And I told that I had an English teacher, and I was like, oh yeah, I like socialism and all this. This is back in 2002. I've changed since then. And she said, she said verbatim, you cannot be a socialist and a Christian. He said those two things are not compatible. You've got to choose one. You've got to choose.
Which one was she? Is it because she was an atheist socialist?
Oh yeah. Oh, I don't know if she was atheist. She could have been pagan. I don't know.
Yeah,
but what she was saying,
not Christian.
Yeah, that's right. She saw Christianity, and actually, now that I think about it, all these memories are coming back. She showed a video at one point. It was a VHS tape, 2002, and it was talking about oppression of women in the United States, and at one point it showed a giant cross, and the implication was that the Christian patriarchy is behind the oppression of women in the United States. But so anyway, I left the faith, not because of her, but because I, within a year and a half of coming to the university, I came to believe that, like, intelligent people, intellectuals are not, they don't believe the Bible. It's a myth. I've been, my parents, they're kind people. I love them, but they're simple-minded. That's
this powerful argument subjectively that people, and so you'll see every now and then Christian apologists will write books about how, God at Harvard or something, where, hey, I found 5 Harvard professors who believe in God. This is great.
So I never heard, but to be clear, I never heard an apology. I never heard an attack, an explicit attack on Christianity.
Right.
Like, I never took a class with Bart Ehrman or something,
like, just the atmosphere around you.
Yeah, it was the general atmosphere. The presumption was God either doesn't exist or you can't know him, and Christianity is for simple-minded people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So now you could imagine someone say, well, we didn't, I mean, that's just we never said that. You're like inventing these things in your mind. Well, you've got that statistic behind you. 70% of the young people are having that same experience.
Yeah.
That this is a aggressive attack on their faith, so that they leave the faith by the end of it. And so I mentioned earlier, that's not necessary at a secular university. Secular doesn't mean atheist. It doesn't mean anti-faith.
Right.
It could mean, and we have plenty of scholars in the history of thought to point this out, it could mean that you come here to the university, you don't know if God exists, you study the best arguments, and you come to the knowledge that God does exist. That's just as much secular as not.
Well, that whole concept, correct me if I'm wrong, but that whole concept of secular, I mean, that came out of Aquinas, right? In the scholastics.
Yeah. We might want to even question that, but I'm okay in one. I use this other term, general revelation. I'm okay with saying we have a university dedicated to general revelation, and then there's other private universities dedicated to scripture.
Right. Yeah.
I'm fine with that in one sense.
Yeah, totally.
But I don't think that this requires us to say that, well, then you're going to go there and you're going to lose your faith. Now, unfortunately, I think that so this Phidias student who's coming in and use the word simple-minded, which I think is okay because I think that's how the character is named in the Proverbs. The Proverbs has
Right.
two characters: the fool, who says he knows and he doesn't know. I think he's the skeptic.
Yep.
And the simple, who doesn't care to know. They haven't searched it out. They don't care. And so the fool preys on the skeptic or the simple, and then they both become fools.
Wow.
So that's how Proverbs lays it out. And I don't think it's an accident that the most famous American fictional character worldwide of the last 30 years, his last name is the Simpleton, son of the simple, Homer Simpson. He's the face of American pop culture.
Yeah.
And that's what he is. He's a simple person. He doesn't care to know. The humor of it is that he works at a nuclear power plant and he doesn't have a college degree or education. He doesn't know what he's doing. And he'd be terrifying if he was real because of that. But a lot of people are very simple. They don't care to have knowledge.
And neither does Bart.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole family, yeah, that's right. So,
yeah, the Simpsons, they're all just so. Yeah. So if the fool might try to make a case, the skeptic might try to make a case and say, look, I'm just helping the simple become sophisticated. And I don't want to let them get away with that. Because I think, no, if you really cared about that, you'd end up at that third stage of having knowledge.
Yeah.
And so that's what I would suggest is that the whole purpose of the academy is to get knowledge. Not every discipline is about something like religion or God's existence. So if in economics that stuff doesn't come up, yeah, fine. But there are classes, and there's especially humanities classes, where questions like what is real, what's our purpose in life, how do we lead a good life? Those are the very questions that we're studying.
That's right. And we keep going back to Romans 1, that great opening chapter. Claiming to be wise, they became what? Fools. They became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. I wonder, Owen, we don't have that anymore. We don't have those idols anymore. But I wonder if it still applies, and that the so-called wise, who are in fact fools, are exchanging the glory of the immortal God for their own man-made philosophies, designed in their own image, out of an innate resistance, rebellion against the truth revealed first in nature and then in Scripture of the one true God.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think there's what we could call gross idolatry or physical idolatry, meaning, hey, I've got a statue over there. His name is Zeus. And then there's conceptual idolatry, which it may not manifest in a physical statue, but you have replaced the truth about God with your own, and I like this phrase from Romans, vain imagination. So you can imagine anything you want, but it's imaginary. It's not real.
Right.
And then in idolatry, you end up thinking your imagination is real. So, I mean, the going cosmology today, or theory of origins, evolution, at least say this maybe we'll do a podcast on that in more depth, but at least say this: the idea that humans came from blind chance and then slow changes to animals is not new to the 19th century and Darwin. This kind of theory has been around in the world from the very beginning, and it's attributing creation to something in the act of creation to something in the creation. We came from other animals and blind chance, not from God, the creator. So I think that's a direct example of what Romans 1 says.
Yeah, which is always interesting when they say we came from chance. Chance is not an object. It's not, chance does not have agency. It's a data, it's a numbers thing.
Yeah.
There is zero chance that a supernatural creator did not exist, because it is logically impossible. We're going way off.
Necessary being, that's right though.
No, it is. So to talk about chance, there is no chance. When you look at the arguments, and I agree with the classical arguments in favor of God, the classical apologetic, I think, is right on. That you cannot have, if at any point nothing existed, nothing would exist today. You cannot have the world around us unless there is a self-existent being with creative power. Can't happen.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I agree. So that's a great summary in a nutshell, what you just said. Of we can elaborate on that more. I mean, we'll do that, but minimally, yeah, you can't have an uncaused event, something from nothing. If there's only nothing, there will always be nothing.
But you have to give it to some of these philosophers. They will acknowledge, and they do acknowledge the vanity, and you said the imaginary that they have to
the
imagine.
vain imagination.
But isn't that what existentialism is all about? How do we orient ourselves in a meaningless, absurd world?
Yeah.
And how do you make sense of it? You yourself determine meaning. You yourself give determine your own values.
Yeah.
And what are the number one virtues in this existentialist philosophy? Being authentic. Being yourself, just be yourself.
Yep.
That's
how we got here.
That so the
motto of French existentialism is existence precedes essence.
Yep.
So you exist and then you determine your own essence. All of our cultural debates right now about self-identity are that I exist and then I'll determine what kind of nature I am.
Yep. And so you could say, so far from being a secular university, actually, and saying this while acknowledging that in the vast majority of classes, these subjects don't come up, but in certain classes they do. Yeah. In a philosophy or in some of the humanities courses, the faith is in moral relativism, in plural, and this pluralism of equality of all values and of all norms, and everything is socially constructed. That itself is a statement of faith, and is a pseudo religion in and of itself. And so when you say the secular university, every instructor in every classroom comes in with a worldview. Mm-hmm. Okay. And it's going to influence how they present the material.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting that you said that statement of faith. I like that, because private schools very often do have a statement of faith you have to agree to. And so there's a kind of unwritten statement of faith in the humanities where you'll be viewed as very odd if you don't hold to moral relativism and the other things you listed. So that is interesting. You could almost maybe write up the statement of faith, the secular or the postmodern statement of faith, the existential statement of faith.
Yep. And students are in certain fields, especially are exposed to that on a day-to-day basis in the university. So of course it's going to have an impact.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing. One thing I was thinking about though too is that just now is that the classes that don't have direct, relationship to bringing up God or meaning in life. And I mentioned economics because I know that's your area. But what often happens is little statements are made. So a professor might be, let's say they're teaching just cell biology, nothing to do with origins.
Right.
But there'll be little statements made that don't need to be made. They have nothing to do with the subject. But they're very influential. So you'll be studying cell biology and you'll say, look what chance plus time can do.
Right.
And say, well, that has nothing to do with the subject right now. Or look at what, people used to think God made this, but look at what we know now. And so it's almost like these little flavorings of the lecture that show you the professor's worldview and then affect the students because they do the kind of thing you said, which is they think, well, I guess a smart person must think this way.
And this is where the church really needs to step up and deliberately go out of its way to make sure that the youth within the church, especially the high school students, are prepared for what's coming, that they are not caught off guard.
Well, that's 70%.
I was caught off guard.
Yep.
So if you, and this is kind of goes back to what we were saying about the political bias, we noted how that actually those who are students who are on the left are disadvantaged because they're not exposed to the other side's ideas, whereas students of alternative perspectives have that additional advantage of having their perspective and knowing the other side.
Yep.
And and so when that high school student ought to come into the university already understanding these basic presumptions that will come into a classroom so that they can identify it and know it.
Yeah. And they don't have that.
No, they don't. And then to answer like common like objections about the Bible, like, you know, how many different what do they call it, when you have different manuscript and like there's one little word that might be missing,
like a redaction by the later editor.
So say, you know, there are so many hundreds and hundreds within in the New Testament of all these, and it sounds like really compelling. You're like, whoa, I had no idea. Like, but if you really dig into it, you'll see, oh, actually that's a bunch
doesn't
of
affect the content at all.
No.
Like it's not like one manuscript said there are two persons, and another one says there's three persons of the Trinity. You're like, oh, which one is it? It's not like that at all.
No, there's nothing like that, you know. I mean, and so like, but you wouldn't know that if you come into the classroom with no prior knowledge that that's even a thing.
Yeah.
And then you're caught off guard, like, whoa, I was never told that. Why was I never told that?
That's one thing that's always struck me. I've had students tell me they'll be in my class and they'll just tell me about what, say, a New Testament class at ASU, what the teachers are saying. And it's always startled me because the New Testament teachers are treating the New Testament with such contempt.
Yeah.
And we don't even treat, let's say we don't treat the Iliad that way. Like when I read the Iliad, I don't think Zeus is real, but it's a great work of fiction. And so I'm not contemptuous of the Iliad. So even if you thought the New Testament's purely fiction, that doesn't follow you should treat it contemptuously. I remember one student told me that their New Testament professor told them that the Bible teaches you get pregnant through your ear because when Elizabeth heard the voice of Mary, the baby leapt in her womb. This is an intellectual with a PhD reading it that poorly. So it's just, I mean, you wouldn't even read other books that you don't agree with that way. It's almost like a particular hatred of the Bible.
So imagine you're like an incoming freshman, you've gone to we'll say like Hillsong or something, okay, not hating, whatever, you know, but and you come in, you're going to be completely thrown off guard, and you're going to be it's going to shake you like nothing else.
Well, that's why you'll see this trajectory. That student with that kind of background comes in and you'll see a movement in their lives, because at first they'll just think, maybe I can smash liberal policies into Christianity.
Right.
And you'll see them go through that stage for a while. And then eventually down the road, they end up jettisoning the Christianity part and keeping the liberal policies part. So it's like, come on, let's have some other alternative views offered. And really what I think it comes back to for us, really beginning in K through 12, as you said, and in the church, is teaching people how to know things.
Yep.
Because if a student comes in, their only way to know things is by quoting a Bible verse, then they don't know how to know things.
Yep.
So we need to teach them how to use reason, to read general revelation, and then be able to ask questions of their professors. I mean, if you tell me the professor says there is no God, okay, well, what do you think? Only atoms and the void exist? Well, that's a really simple view. It's not particularly hard to show that's false. So you can ask professors questions, and they should be able to defend their beliefs if they're attacking other beliefs.
I think I know we're running a little over, but this is a great conversation, Owen. I think one of the greatest objections that's levied against Christianity, and it's understandable given in our this world of moral relativism, pluralism, all the rest. Probably the number one offensive thing about Christianity is the exclusivity of Christianity. Mm-hmm. Now, I'll say that. Let me give a little caveat. I think Christianity, on the one hand, is radically inclusive.
Yeah, all peoples, all nations,
all peoples, all tribes, all nations. There's neither Jew nor Greek nor slave nor free. Christianity is radically inclusive. Yeah. That's one, and that's offensive to the critical theorist. So it's kind of funny, and we won't go into that. We'll talk about that another time. But I think the critical theorist finds the radical inclusivity of Christianity to be offensive. Yeah. Because it's saying, put away all of your other identities. Yeah. Your number one identity is Christ, period. and that's not to say you don't have other identities,
Yeah.
but they are to be they are subservient to your identity in Christ.
Yep.
And that is offensive to the critical theorists. So on the one hand, it's radically inclusive, but it's also radically exclusive. What did Jesus say? Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Not I am a way, not I am a truth, not I am the way, I am the truth. No one comes to the Father except through me. That is so offensive to this postmodern age. They can't handle that.
They can't handle either side of it.
They hear words like that and their heads start exploding, because it contradicts all their core value system, their core belief system. And so one more verse for you. Acts 4 verse 12. There is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. That's the message that they don't like. And so if you're a believer and you're going into college this fall, or you're currently in college right now, understand that those truth claims that I just laid out there you will face fierce attack, fierce assault, not because they're simple, but because that's the truth, and because it goes against this entire system, this entire worldview that the university is so committed to.
And what you're seeing then is really a great spiritual war going on, because the Apostle Paul also said that we're not involved in a physical war. We're involved in a war between these two sides. And so both sides think the other one's wrong. So you shouldn't be surprised as a young student coming into the university that there's going to be these attacks on the faith, because that's part of what's going on. They're saying, look, there is no God. There is no soul. And so you don't need to be saved from anything. So you don't need Christ.
And
so
understand,
that shouldn't surprise anybody.
And understand also, as well, young believer, this is not new. This is not new to the 21st century. Christians have had to face these objections through the entire history of the church. You don't think the early church heard objections from the Roman imperial population, some of these same objections? One more verse, Owen, if I may. This is from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4. The God of this world, it's a lowercase g, the God of this world has blinded the minds of unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel. This is spiritual, as you point out correctly, this is spiritual war. You need to understand, young believer, that the God of this world is in operation. Who is who is the father of this world? is Satan himself. And so you have to understand this is spiritual warfare. And come with you've got to come with your armor on. That armor, you better have your armor on.
It's not just an act of the will. I think what you and I are saying today is get your mind engaged, be renewed by the transforming of your mind. Not just a matter of, I'm not going to listen to anyone who disagrees with me, but I'm going to go in there and I'm going to be able to show, look, these other views are false, and here's how you can show it's false. So I love in 2 Corinthians 10:5 that he says, be ready to demolish all arguments set up against the knowledge of God.
Yeah, he doesn't say be ready to plug your ears.
Yeah, right. You're ready to demolish them.
Right.
So you show these, and then in 1 Corinthians, the wisdom of this world became foolishness. By the wisdom of this world, they didn't even know God, which is clear to everyone. So that's great. That's a great admonition and encouragement.
I'm reading to my young kids right now. I'm reading a children's version of Pilgrim's Progress. I'm reminded it's been a little more than a decade since I last read Pilgrim's Progress, and I need to pick it up
so
again.
Good.
This is a children's version. Man, that's such a great metaphor and illustration of our walk as Christians. And you're right, we need to engage. You can't hide away. You've got to have on that full armor, and you've got to also be bold in your faith, and to understand that that God has you under his protection, but that God has given you a calling, and that you are where you are for a reason, for a purpose, and to tackle that head on.
Yeah, that's great. So it's a great way to wrap up this segment on religious bias at the secular university. And thank you for joining us. I'm looking forward to our next one, where we'll look at, sounds like we're lined up to look at more in depth on critical theory.
Yep.
All right. So, yeah, join us next time.
Thanks for watching, everybody.